Alright, a bit of a new setup here. Now I'm using my monitor, my second monitor as my main screen, and then I'm using my OBS on my left here. I'm using my laptop screen as my OBS. So my camera is here on top of my monitor, and it does kind of cover it as well, which is kind of annoying, but it's fine, not a huge deal. And then I got myself over here on the left. And I can show you now. I figured out, well, I learned that you can literally, because like before, like to switch workspaces between monitors, I would do like this funky like swap the app to a different workspace and swap that, and like take ownership of that and stuff like that, whatever. But now I've learned that there's actually a command for this, so I can just now do my super shift and then an arrow key to shift it. In fact, I had X even, B to swap it. But like, let's say right now, I want OBS, and I want to move it to my other monitor. I can just do super shift right arrow, and now I'm there, right? And now my thing is switched as well. I can move it back, and likewise I can take this thing over here and move this to my other monitor. So now you see my Obsidian because it's now moved to my other monitor. If I showed both monitors at once in my recording, it'd be easier for you to see that, but yeah, it's cool. And it's very convenient. It means that now when I plug in my monitor, I can switch my stuff. I tried doing it, having it be automatic, so that whenever I plugged in my monitor, it would just automatically switch all my workspaces over. But and like there is a command for that called swap workspaces, or like swap monitors even, but it doesn't seem to work. Like it only swaps the two that I'm on, the two workspaces I'm on, whereas I wanted to swap all of them. So I'll probably script that at some point to have it so that it at least manually moves my browser, Obsidian, Discord, and Claude. But you know, it's only 4 things anyways. Like it's not a hassle to do it manually. But yeah, just explaining that real quick. Anyway, today, holy voice. Today, I don't know. I have a few choices here. Well, actually, I have a few choices, but I kind of wanted to focus on this because it came up on my Instagram feed. So I'll just open it up here. Hopefully I'm logged in. I'm not logged in. Okay, I'm gonna log in first then. But yeah, I got my save post here, and there's this one here from, I mean, it's BBC, but like I don't know who it's. It's Kemi Badenoch or Badenoch. She's a politician in the UK. I don't know her. Like this is my first time seeing her, but she basically says, well, let me play it from the beginning.
Saying that if we want to have a well-integrated society, we need to make sure that we have a shared culture and a shared identity. This is a multi-ethnic society. That's obvious. I'm a black woman sitting here talking to you. But there is a difference between being multi-ethnic and being multicultural. I grew up in a place that was multicultural, and yet everybody looked the same. Conflict arises when you emphasize difference. We need to emphasize the things that we share. Being British, British values, the things that we talked about, freedom, equal rights, personal responsibility, not discriminating people because of their sexual orientation. There are some cultures that do that. I don't think that a culture that thinks gay people should be stoned is as valid as ours. This is not a controversial thing to say.
Again, I mean, I barely know who this is. This is my first impression of her. I know she's in the Conservative Party for the UK. I don't follow the Conservatives, so like I don't even know what they're up to. All I know is that apparently a lot of them have left for reform, which means that the people who stayed behind are probably some of the better lot, which is a good thing, I guess. But she makes a very good point. Now, first of all, the difference between, like, multi-ethnic and multicultural. I mean, you know, literally, the first thing you learn if you do any psychology course is that, well, is the nurture versus nature debate. Even if you don't do psychology, you would have heard of it. Are we influenced more by our nature or by how we're raised, right? And how you're raised is effectively your culture, like the culture you grew up in. Obviously, there are other factors than just the culture, but largely the culture shapes your cultural identity, and that matters more typically than your ethnic identity. because there isn't strong research to suggest that your ethnicity plays such a big role in, at least not like in like your values and whatnot. Maybe in like your, I don't know, like with ailments and like mental illnesses and predispositions to behavior. For example, being more prone to like anger issues and whatnot. But like ultimately, the values that you inherit and your ability to control as well, like the things that you are genetically disposed of, it seems like you have more control than what your biology gives you, essentially. So, first of all, it's just like reform, or just like a lot of those kind of voters, I guess. It is a lot of it is just targeted at ethnicity, as opposed to the culture, which is unfortunate. Doesn't make sense, you know. Like the UK doesn't have to be a white nation. It's more the culture that makes the UK the UK. Like you don't have to be. I mean, the example I think of is America. I mean, or like at least originally, land of the free, right? And the idea was that anyone could come to America, anyone, and they could inherit, or at least, I don't know, like subscribe to or follow the American ideal of freedom and, you know, making your way up through your own work, right? The capitalist idea of you start a business and you make money and then you earn that money and then you own that money and you can buy property and you own that property and then you can have a big house, you know, the American dream, essentially. And then like at that time, being American didn't mean you were born and bred in America, you know, that you were white or even Native American. It meant that you were, you came to America and then you adopted that culture, whether or not you were actually, again, from that country. And even abroad, you know, they would share their American values, and then, I don't know, people could say they're American even if they're not actually from America. But then, that's kind of shifted now to being more focused on your ethnicity and like when you're actually born, which is very backwards. Not really sure how we came to that. I guess polarizing news and politics and whatnot, and like people judge books by their covers, although there are other covers you can also look at, like look at how someone behaves rather than how someone looks. But you know, it's easier to discriminate based on looks because that's what is immediately available to you, as opposed to, I don't know, hearing someone out and seeing what they're actually like first. And it doesn't have well, again, like with the news, how it probably, well, not probably, how it does disproportionately report news that confirms biases and like racist stereotypes. So yeah, anyway, there's a lot there. But what I was particularly interested in as well was this idea of a monocultural society. Because the UK is definitely multi-ethnic, but it is also multicultural. And despite that, it's less that the UK is multicultural. Well, no. So like the UK as a country is home to a lot of different cultures. But the actual British, like the British identity, the British culture, is its own specific thing. By which I mean, by which I mean, in the country of Britain, or I know it's like this UK, but let's just say it's called Britain, right? In the country of Britain, the British culture is not the only culture, is what I'm trying to say. Which means people who come to the UK don't necessarily adopt the British culture and the British values and the British ideals. And it's not just the UK, it goes for other countries too. like, I don't know, Sweden and Japan, I guess. And the arguments that people make, which is very fair, and by people I mean like, I guess more people who'd be seen as more right-leaning, is that, well, when people go to countries like Japan, and they disrespect the culture, they don't assimilate, that's seen as the problem of the immigrants, right, of the foreigners going into those countries. Whereas with the UK, it is seen as an issue of the host country for not adopting the new cultures. Or with Sweden, people also like Japan and Sweden are two countries that, and like cultures that are very highly praised, because they seem to be very well functioning. Like the Swedish culture, again, like when you have people coming to that country and not following those cultural norms, then that also causes issues for for that country and that culture. So especially like if, particularly for countries that are built on like trust and respect, right? Like do not litter, a very basic one, or give way to cyclists. Have more cyclist culture, like maybe like in Copenhagen, for instance. That's a big one. And like being safe on the roads, like just things that do affect other people on the day to day, and then that culture is like built up from like respect, but like these aren't taught globally. Like those cultural values will be taught not even just in school, but through like interactions with other citizens, growing up as a child. Your parents will instill these values in you, and like these are passed down. And the reason I bring that up is because like it's not necessarily the fault of the migrants or the immigrants that they don't understand the culture, especially if they're put in a situation where they're moving less because they like love the culture and like, ooh, I'm gonna go to the UK or Sweden or Japan because it's awesome, and like I know the culture and I'm gonna do my best to commit to it, but more because they're moving because they want to leave their current situation, which is less, well, livable. Yeah. So again, like not to shift blame, but like, or like not maybe to point blame, but just saying like this is what happens. But then she proposes a monocultural society. Well, I say monocultural. She says shared culture, but ultimately it is obviously going to be a one shared culture. And I feel like I have good grounds to speak on this because I myself, first of all, I'm from 4 different countries and I've barely lived in any of them. Like I lived in the UK for the longest time out of those 4 different nations, and I've lived here for a combined, let's say, 5.5 years, and I'm 20 years old. The first 4 years was literally when I was born, up to when I was 4 years old. So I don't remember any of that. So if you don't count that, it's been like a year and a half. Plus, the half was spent in Northern Ireland, so you could also debate whether that's like the UK or, like it is the UK, but like culturally speaking, is it more Irish? It's definitely mixed. So there's that. And then I spent my other years in like Malaysia, Vietnam, Qatar. I was in the Canary Islands for a little bit, although nothing crazy significant there. Which means I myself do not necessarily tie myself to any one national identity. Because she says a few things there. She says British, and British culture, and, well, let's see. It'd be nice if I could like scroll through this.
I am saying that if we want to have a well-integrated society, we need to make sure that we have a shared culture and a shared identity. This is a multi-ethnic society. That's obvious. I'm a black woman sitting here talking to you. But there is a difference between being multi-ethnic and being multicultural. I grew up in a place that was multicultural, and yet everybody looked the same. Conflict arises when you emphasize difference.
I wonder where she did grow up. Because I assume she grew up in the UK? Leader of the opposition in the United Kingdom. Leader of the opposition. Right. Is she ethnically Nigerian? Born in London. University of Lagos. and then University of Sussex, and then University of London. So it's 3 different places. As yeah. It'd be interesting to look at the history there. Andy Burnham invites Kemi and Ed Davey, but not Nigel Farage. Yeah. I do have higher hopes now for the UK. Like, things are looking pretty grim, but with Andy Burnham entering the field, and he's actually being like willing to talk to these other politicians and say that we need less of this like party versus party, and like point scoring, and more like actually, talking and like finding ways to, to like accommodate everyone. That's really good. I think if he gets voted in the next election, I'll have very, very high hopes for this country. But also it's nice to see that I mean, again, like I've barely heard from this woman, but she did point out how, again, a lot of the more unreasonable conservatives, or like Conservative Party members, have left for reform or restore. So that also makes probably it easier for the Conservative Party and the Liberals and also the Green Party to work together, which is nice. So things are looking optimistic. Anyway,
we need to emphasise the things that we share.
Right, so
being British, British values, the things that we talked about: freedom, equal rights, personal responsibility, not discriminating people.
Yeah, so 2 things there. I just realised I wasn't sharing my screen, but she said British and British values. And then she goes on to list some of the values, like equal rights and freedom. But, yeah, so there is an issue with it being British. Because I used the example before for America, right? And having that American dream. If you call yourself American, then you are following those American values, and that it doesn't matter where you're from. But first of all, that has only ever really applied to America. Maybe you had like the empires, right? That would say like, oh yes, you are now British and you are under British values or Soviet values, whatever. But that was more colonization than like actually, like, if you said you were British, it meant you were colonized by the British, not that you like, I don't know, subscribe to British values. Whereas if you said you're American, you wouldn't necessarily colonized by America. You probably moved there freely, or maybe you weren't even in America, but you just considered yourself to be American because you subscribe to those values. So like in that way, although America gets a lot of flack these days, like back then it was a very interesting idea where you were separating kind of, well, the culture from the nation, right? Like the national identity wasn't really a national identity, it was more cultural, which is really interesting. Because like obviously like you still had the American government, and like you had the United States of America, the country, but like it's the idea that you don't necessarily even have to be associated with that government to still instill those values, and that's very interesting. But it again, like that was kind of like a one-off thing. It doesn't really work for other nations. If you say you're British, people expect that to mean that you are from the UK. You're probably born from the UK, born in the UK. Like when people ask, a classic question for someone who's lived abroad in international schools, when people ask where you're from, there are 3 different answers. There's where were you born, there's what's your ethnicity, and there's where have you lived, basically. So three components, right? And for me, it's like, was I born? Well, Liverpool, but I lived there for 4 years, and I don't remember any of it. Ethnicity, well, I'm English, I'm Irish, I'm Ghanaian, and I'm German. Have I ever been to Germany? No. Have I been to Ghana? Yes, once. Have I been to Ireland? Yes. And England? Yes, I lived there for 4 years, but most of the time it's where I've lived, where have you lived, and that would be Malaysia, Vietnam, Canary Islands, Qatar. So like, 3 components that are very different. Like where you're born is by far the least important one, I can say. And what your ethnicity is also not that important, because like mostly that's more about like where your parents hail from, and what their experience is. Ultimately, what really matters is where you've lived, because that speaks to your experience more than your, I don't know, an ancestral origin. So really, like the 2 things that I care about are, again, wherever I lived and wherever my parents lived. Because, I mean, my parents grew up in the UK. My mum was born in London. She grew up in Belfast. But then, well, you know, which is still in the UK. And then my dad, but then also, I think she went to university in England? Maybe? Like, first Ireland, then England. And then my dad grew up in Wellingborough City, English town, and, well, English City, I guess, because that's in the name. And went to university. Well, actually, they both went to university at Liverpool, yeah. So, I don't know why I'm forgetting. And now I'm going to that university too. I mean, town, city, whatever. Point is, that's more interesting than saying, oh yeah, my dad is English German, and my mum is Irish Ghanaian. Because that information isn't really useful to you. Because it doesn't really tell you much about them. It just tells you their genetic makeup, which isn't really an important factor, right? When it comes to like upbringing and how they actually like are as people. You get more information from me telling you where they grew up. Because then then you have an idea of like what kind of environment it was, what values were surrounding them, and then for me as well, because you know I can grow up in different countries, but you know your parents obviously will pass on a lot of their values to you. So you'd want to know that my parents both grew up in the UK, and I grew up abroad, and then you get a thing, and then you get a sense of like, oh okay, so like he's like kind of British like in his values, but he's also inherited other values from places he's lived. That gives you a much fuller picture with like still very little information. Like all I told you was that yeah, my parents grew up in the UK, and I grew up like in Malaysia, Vietnam, and Qatar. Like it's pretty quick to say, right? But it's like, huh, okay. Like that tells me a lot more than if I said, yeah, I was born in Liverpool. I'm German, by the way. You know, quality German. It's like, oh, do you speak German? 9. It's like, oh, okay. You know what I mean? And then with the national identity, I'm British in terms of my passport, right? But like I'm all like proud to be British, or like proud to be Irish, or proud to be Canadian, or well yeah, proud to be German, because like I'm barely have any connection with my German roots. So it's like, if you ask me, where are you from? I would best tell you where I lived, because that's what I would feel like is more integral to my identity. Now, for a lot of people, or, you know, for the vast majority of people, they have grown up in the country they were born in and hail from ethnically. So, like, it's very easy to kind of blur that all into one thing, and for some reason, it's the ethnicity that sticks out. Because, like, where you've lived, where you're born, and where you are ethnically from are all the same thing. But then, for some reason, we assume that the ethnicity then is the one that we're going to focus on when we say where you're from, which is kind of weird. It is changing, especially in the UK. Like, if people say where you're from nowadays, like when I'm in university, you know, I've met a lot of people who are either mixed or just ethnically from a different country, and then their parents moved to the UK. Because, I mean, like, even with, first of all, Liverpool is a very diverse, and like, you know, like, a very liberal city. So, that alone, you're going to get a mix of different people. But then in the university as well, it's 33% international students. But, like, when I've asked someone where they're from, they will usually tell me the town they grew up in, which is nice, you know, because like it's like, well, yeah, it's more, it's very different from what I'm used to, which is in international schools when they ask where you're from, because in international schools, since you're international, you know, like they're asking the country you're from, whereas here, since like they kind of assume that everyone is British, it's more like what part of the UK are you from, is that kind of question. However, if someone looks like they aren't, you know, from the UK, ethnically, then the question is more expected to be what country are you from? So like it's a loaded question, and the answer is expected to be different depending on who you ask. Yeah. So where am I going with this? First of all, you don't need to be ethnically British to be a British nationalist. Especially on social media, because people can hide their faces. You get a lot of like, why are you so, I don't know, adamant on upholding British values when you're not even British yourself, right? Like people will say that, or not even you're not British, but like you're not white, is what they mean. Like for example, take Kemi here, right? If she was just, I don't know, upholding conservative values, on like social media, on like an Instagram comment, like I guarantee someone would reply and say, why are you saying that? You're not white, so why do you care about our country's politics? Which is, yeah, I mean that's just racism, quite frankly. So, yeah, so like, the point I'm trying to make is there is an inherent danger with national identity. Not because it's bad to say, yes, I'm British, or I'm Swedish, or I'm Japanese, right? If the implication is that, and you can be British too if you adopt my values, or, well, our values, or you can be Japanese too if you adopt our values. That's not the problem. The problem is how nationality is perceived in the modern day, which is very much where you are from ethnically. Like, it's not easy to become a British citizen, or to become a Swedish citizen, or definitely not a Japanese citizen if you're not from that country. And there's a growing sentiment among just countries in general to, for some reason, make that harder as well. And so it goes beyond even like racism. Like racism is a very like to be racist like is a very, well, you'd hope that it's a very dated thing, that like you don't really get racists in the day to day. It's now more shifting to xenophobia, right, or xenophobia, however you want to say it, which is, well, I mean, like I guess etymologically speaking, it would be fear of foreigners, right? And that's how I would like to use it: a fear of foreigners, or a distrust of foreigners, right? And also because it's phobia, it's irrational. That's the implication as well. It's definitely not, you know, a term you would adopt for yourself. It's one that's used against people. Like, for example, in Malaysia, again, the country I spent 9 years living, by the way, so like way longer than I have in any other country. And would I call myself Malaysian? No, but like I did grow up there for 9 years anyway. They had a scheme called, I think it was called Malaysia My Home, where foreigners, immigrants could come in and I guess like have like a pension scheme or something. And even like after a certain amount of years, they could even apply for a Malaysian citizenship, and that probably was quite good for the country as well, just in terms of getting like jobs going, and like getting people to come in and like invest and show their interest in the country. But now with the new government, or at least the recent government, whatever, the current government, they've been cutting back on that. Like they've cancelled Malaysia My Home, for instance. I can look at that. Malaysia My Home, or like My Second Home or something. Yeah, My Second Home, that's it. MM2H. It allows foreign citizens to live long-term in Malaysia through 4 main tiers: Silver, Gold, Platinum, and the Special Economic Zone. Right. And there's a limit here. Or there's yeah, requirements here. Now, was it cancelled? Heavily structured. Okay. So first of all, the tiers are new. That's right. Yeah. So there's stricter requirements, which basically makes it kind of unsustainable for anyone who actually wants to move, unless you're like, I guess, rich. Is the idea. I mean, this is 2 weeks ago, and I haven't looked that deeply into it, so I don't want to misinform, but it's what I've heard, because I know a lot of expats. What was this about? Temporary suspension? I don't know if that was like significant. Just like a few day thing. Right, yeah, COVID as well. Allowing foreigners to enter Malaysia for the outbreak of COVID-19. Yeah. I believe also like it screwed over existing people who were relying on it, because they had to then meet the new requirements after the thing was reintroduced, and for a lot of people they just couldn't do it, which really messed up like their pension schemes or like their retirement plans. Which is, you know, kind of devious. And many would call that, well, some, hopefully not many, would, no, but like many would call that, you know, they're just protecting their own country. You know, protecting their culture and whatnot, and, you know, giving the priority to the actual Malaysians who are born and bred in Malaysia. And the same goes for other countries, like, you know, whatever. But it's very anti-global. It's anti-international. It's anti-partnership, you know? Because like there is an ideal of a world where everyone holds hands, and really a world without borders, right? And that's been an ideal for a long time, but for some reason in recent years that's been going the opposite way. If anything, borders are becoming even more strict and bold, and preventing migration and world unity rather than accepting it. And so it's culture. That's the issue. As she says, if you have a lot of different cultures, no matter what whether they're the same ethnicity or whatever, whether they look the same, it's the cultures that will ultimately spark the conflict. And you're like, most racism, xenophobia, whatever, like that comes from culture being associated with ethnicity or with a nation. So that's one reason already why a nation shouldn't tie itself to its culture, per se. Which sounds weird, but like, more as in a culture shouldn't tie itself to a nation. How about that? Because then it's like, it's more exclusive, or excluding, I should say. Like when you say, I am British because I believe in freedom and equal rights and all this kind of thing, and then let's say you go to like, I don't know, Kenya, right? And you meet a bunch of Kenyans, and you're like, and like you say this to them, and then they're like, wait, so then, I guess since I'm not British, I can't be, I can't value freedom and all those kind of things. Or maybe they say, well, that sounds like Kenyan to me, are you sure you're not Kenyan? I mean, that would be like the what's the word? The ideal scenario where people like, openly accept you into their culture and their national identity. But I feel like more often than not, people just be like, what? those aren't British values. In fact, maybe they have different ideas of British values or American values. You know, maybe they see British as greedy and socially awkward and, I don't know, cold even. Not just like weather-wise, but like, you know, the way that we express our emotions would be very different from how people express their emotions in Asian or African countries. Because maybe they're more open with stuff. So, what if, instead of saying, I'm British, or I'm American, or I'm Filipino, or I'm Japanese, or I'm Kenyan, or I'm Ghanaian, or Nigerian, or Chinese, what if, because like, when you say that, you either mean I'm from there, which is like fair enough, but like, when you're talking about your culture, what it really means is like, I'm support of my country's culture, or even my government. That's the other one, my government. A lot of Americans may hesitate to say that they're American because of how people associate America with Trump, right? And the corruption that goes on there. But even outside of that, like, there are people who don't want to associate with their cultures or their nations because of that dominant culture. Like, how much racism do Indians face worldwide because of the not even stereotypes, but like the understandings about their culture, and what people kind of take away from it, like what they see is like the litter, the roads, everything's dirty, people, I don't know, bathing in the river, whatever it's called. I'm so bad with names, but like, it's not like it's wrong. And like, there's a growing, let's say, movement in India right now, which is like this, pushing this idea of civic sense. I get so many videos, like, from like India and Indians, where it's like pushing for civic sense, and I mean, for me, like, this, like, I was first became aware of this when I got like this YouTube video in my home feed, where it was this guy talking to, I guess, India as a nation. He himself was Indian, and he was explaining why India is not, you know, kicking off like China and like these other countries that before were seen as quite poor but have now become very prosperous. And he's saying that, like, you know, it's not even necessarily a government issue, but it's a cultural issue of having civic sense, and he stresses this thing, right? And unfortunately, you know, although there are people who want to fight back against the issues that India faces, and by people I mean like Indians, it's just like the negatives of that, of the culture and the whatever, the country, end up being applied to all of them as a stereotype. Just unfortunate. So then it's like, if they say, yeah, I'm Indian, like, then that's all those negative stereotypes that people associate with India, well, not stereotypes, but let's say ideas and beliefs that people associate with India, because like they are literally based on fact, gets, you know, like, if it gets attached to that label of Indian, or if you're American, you know, to use a white example, you may be associated with being loud, you know, annoying, fake smiles, greedy, you know, Epstein stuff. Like, this is literally like, I've gone reels of people going to like Japan, and literally getting racist. Well, like literally experiencing racism firsthand in Japan, because Japanese people think Americans are all the things I described, And also British as well. You know, like British people who go to Thailand are only there to pick up girls, and you know, like yeah, I do devious things. So and I take advantage of the fact that they are coming from a first world country, going to a. I mean, at least back then, but still probably a country that's less developed, and taking advantage of the people there, who probably are only interacting with them because they can get benefit out of it, you know, like money, or like connections, right? So like that stereotype is also applied to British people, to Americans, and that's interesting because like you don't really, like that's not something that people think about in the UK or in the US because they don't go abroad. They are the ones who apply the stereotypes. We're not so used to being the ones who receive them, right?
I am saying.
So very interesting times. Anyway, so my argument is ultimately that we shouldn't attach ourselves to our national identities. It's easy for me to say because I literally don't have one. I can say my passport is British. That doesn't mean that my national identity is British. It is many more things than just British values. There's also Malaysian values and Vietnamese values and even Qatari values, right? I'm not Muslim, but like there are still things that I can learn from having lived in a Muslim society. Both positives and negatives, but the point is there are positives that influence who I am. And people who have never interacted with Islam, maybe except like outside the news, and like you know, seeing like extremism, like they wouldn't reap the benefits of having lived in that society and seen it firsthand. They just kind of see the negatives, and it's like, well, yeah, it's like you don't have that diverse perspective. Which is not ideal for a global society. Like, in the ideal global society, you have people going to different countries all the time. You know, every single person should have at least flown on a plane at least once in their lifetime and gone to a different country. And like not just like gone there for holiday, but like properly like live there for a decent while and like experienced that country. But also in a global society, maybe we all just have a shared culture and whatever, but that's highly unlikely to happen because there'll always be disagreements in some way or another. I mean, people don't. I mean, like you can't even have like an objective base if there are people who literally refuse to believe in science, right? Or like believe that science is true and reliable when it's literally designed from the ground up to be that way. So, yeah, like if I'm gonna focus specifically on the UK, if we do call ourselves British, we need to move away. Okay, well, two things, because it's both the government and also the people. First of all, the people need to stop associating nationality with ethnicity, right? Your nationality should literally just be the country you live in, and the country you have experience living in. And that means that you can have multiple. You can be British and you can be Pakistani if you grew up in both Pakistan and the UK, right? Like I have a friend whose parents moved to the UK when he was I think 9 years old or maybe a bit older. So like he's experienced living in Pakistan and he goes back to Pakistan to visit his family, but then he also spent a I think the majority of his life, right, growing up in the UK. So like, is he British? Is he Pakistani? You know, like people would try to like label you as one of these things, but like it's not a label that's like this is your one identity. It's more like a thing you collect, you know, in the same way that you would collect like a CV, right? Like when employers look at your CV, they don't just look at well, they might just look at your last job, but that's a bit not very nice. Although your last job would be the most recent, I guess. So like it would show your growth, and that's fair. And the same kind of applies to national identity as well. But generally speaking, you want them to look at your entire employment history, so that they can see that, oh, I worked at this company, but I also worked at this company, and so it's like I've experienced in different types of companies, different environments, different fields. Even if you switch between different fields, an employer might be interested to know that you have worked, I don't know, both in Apple and Microsoft, for example. If you are, I mean, that'd be a crazy CV, but like if you are a programmer, right, who's building software for an operating systems company, then yeah, like maybe they might be interested to know that like you've worked for both sides of that spectrum, or that you've spent time working for open source projects on Linux, or like you've worked at let's say you want to get hired by OpenAI, which is Claude's thing. No, Anthropic, sorry, which is Claude's thing. But then they've seen that you've worked for both OpenAI, ChatGPT, but also you've also worked for Google on Gemini, and you've worked in Microsoft for Copilot, right? Like, they would like to know these things because it shows that you have experience. Likewise, why is that not the sentiment for nationality, right? Like, you being British and Pakistani shouldn't turn people away. It should spark intrigue, because they're like, oh, okay, because like maybe you're not Pakistani, so like, okay, this guy actually might know things, have experience of things that I don't, and that way it's interesting. But it's like, likewise, if you've worked in one company for your entire life, then that shows that you have a lot of, that you do have a lot of experience in that one field as well, in that company. So like maybe you're not a jack of all trades, but you have that really well focused experience. And the same thing goes, if you've lived in the UK all your life, then you probably understand British culture better than anyone else could who's lived in other countries. Is that an advantage? In some areas, yes, but then it's recognizing that different people have different strengths, right? But like the ultimate message is that you can have different people from different backgrounds be welcome, and it's not about how long you spent in one place. It's about what you're willing to now accept. If I've worked at Microsoft for 10 years and then I want to go get a job at Apple will not look at that and say, this guy's a traitor. Microsoft? We only accept Apple purebloods here. No. They'll look at that and say, okay, this guy actually has different experience in like our competitor, or even in a world where they weren't competing. I mean, it's capitalism, but like they're more like companies that had mutual respect for each other, because like they had different values, but the values were still like close enough together that like they respected it, right, and like saw the benefit in it. But even if they were contrasting values and they were like, oh yeah, we don't like Microsoft's values, just the fact that the employee is willing to come to Apple shows that they're willing to adopt the new values, right, and like adjust to it. Now there's a danger that they might try to bring, I don't know, like their Microsoft values and like mess everything up, right? But then that's where the role of the government body comes into play, so that they can moderate that. And I mean that's literally what you have with like border control, right? They will look at you and look at your intentions. Like, are you coming here to work? Are you coming here because you actually like British culture and like you agree with British cultural values, or are you just coming to take advantage of the system we have set up, right? And that's why people, well, that's what is happening at like the higher level of things, I would say. Like you have people who, both conservatives and liberals, liberal Democrats, whatever, alike, want stronger border control, and not just for the UK, but for like Germany, for Sweden, I guess, Japan. But then it's important that the process is fair, right? So that's the first thing with the people. Looking at a nationality not as an ethnic thing, but as a values thing, right? As she says, British and British culture, right? and no, not even British and British values. That's what it should be focused on, the British values. But and what the government needs to do is make those values clear. Have strong, clear values that the people of the country agree upon. Well, ideally, right? But I mean, in a democracy, those values will ultimately be voted by the people anyway. It doesn't mean that you can get polarization, which is another issue, but generally speaking, well, no, I mean, that's the thing though. Like, it's an issue with our with our implementation of democracy, where because people can just come and go, right, and then like the values that are supposedly upheld by the country can change wildly between postings or whatever, between elections. It like, not only is it polarizing because then like the country goes back and forth, and like each time it goes back and forth, it spawns new people who like hold different values. Because like, don't forget that people are born into this system, so like if they grow up in a culture that is rapidly changing around them, like maybe they will see the nuance, but also you get situations where like people just tie themselves to different sides of the spectrum, so over time it will just become more and more polarizing, between particularly like two different parties, which I guess is what we see here. I mean, like Trump won on like what, like, or at least the first time Trump was voted in, it was like very close to a 50-50. When Brexit was voted for, it was very close to a 50-50, and absolutely should not have gone ahead, because any democracy should not like, make decisions when your country's literally on a 50-50 split. That's a terrible idea. So what needs to happen is, I mean, I'm sure the UK has a constitution of some kind, right? Like, America literally has a constitution that probably emphasizes freedom and, I don't know, like the right to bear arms. Like these are fundamental things that are true between governments, right? Or between government presidents, I guess. And the only way that, like, I mean, obviously some things can be changed, and like there have been amendments, but like the only way that, like, for example, America will stop being a capitalist society is if it stopped being America, because of how tied it is to American identity and culture. So like I'm sure the UK has like such things, but like then if it has those things, the government needs to make them clear, educate them, have the schools educate those values. Like, if you believe in the values, use them. And then also, like, if people violate those values, there need to be consequences. And I do mean like kill them all, like arrest people, like deport them, but even just like have like education. Well, I don't like the word education camps, because that's quite. Well, I mean, like, education camps should be a good thing, but of course the issue is always, it can be abused, because if you have bad values, or if a country has bad values that you don't agree with, then now there's a problem, because you're being forced to like educate yourself. So the other important thing is actually you should always have the option to leave the country. Problem is, where do you go? Like, you can't just start a new country. You can't just go to a different country necessarily, because countries don't have open borders. Like, as much as you'd like to believe that we do, countries just don't just let you go in and become a citizen. They'll most likely just send you back to that country. I mean, it's what's happening with like refugees and immigrants, right? They're fleeing their country because of war or economic reasons or a bad government, and they want to come to a country like the UK, where their promises are freedom and equal rights and all the good stuff. But they're turned away not only by the border, but by the people who live there, because they find, oh, I have cultural values that are different from this, and like, so like these, like, assimilation just doesn't really happen as cleanly. or like they're forced to be something they're not, because that governing British culture is dominant and unapologetic. So there's I mean there's an issue, right? Um, nothing's black and white. Yeah. So just again to kind of recap on that, on the issues, right? The issues are, first of all, and so again, attitude towards nationality. Nationality should not be where you are from. It should be where you've been. Governments not upholding their values. There are other countries that are very happy to be very strict with their values, and if you violate their culture, you get in trouble. Then an issue there can be, first of all, the values can be wrong and need to be reevaluated. And if citizens don't have the freedom to speak up and make those amendments and changes, then a country can doom itself to become a bad, not even like necessarily a dictatorship. Like you can still have a democracy, but like if the values are bad and not like open to like being like to being changed, especially if the people, well, in government are, if the corruption is so rampant, then like the country still suffers and the people under it suffer. And then also the methods of dealing with people who don't agree with the values needs to be constructive and educational, not focus on punishment. There's an issue that if someone is deported, they can't just like go to a country that matches their values. Maybe there are no countries that match their values, or the ones that do match their values, you know, like they match some values, but then there are other values that they have issues with. And so like you can't just say, because like people can say I'm British, right, or like I have British values, but like maybe you have some British values, but like ultimately people have different values between each other, and like share different philosophies, and it can get messy, right? Competing philosophies can lead to war, because especially if people have the notion that my philosophy is right. I mean, obviously they would, and that it should be imposed upon other people because it makes their lives better, right? So then you have empires that rise and try to spread, as America did, for instance. I mean, it claimed to do, you know, like spread freedom and whatnot and democracy and capitalism, but there's always someone's better interest in the background, or best interest in the background, like profiting from the oil they take, for instance, you know? I mean, for me, personally, the country where I would feel the most at home is not the country where people look like me, but the people who have the same values as me, right? Because then, like, it's not about having people agree with you. Like, you can have different opinions on things, obviously. Maybe not obviously, but people can have different opinions than you. They can share different beliefs, but it's like the fundamental values that are really important. Like the belief that everyone should be free to, well, I mean, free in what sense though? Like, define that. But like, no one should be discriminated because of XYZ characteristics, right? Like race, gender, sexual orientation, sexual identity, like, or like gender identity, I guess, or like sex and gender. Their elo in chess, like stuff like that. Those are like the fundamental values, or like values around like around littering, you know, like if you're someone who just throws things on the floor and like lets someone else pick it up after you because that's how society should be, then that's a value that may conflict with mine, and like I wouldn't feel particularly happy being around you, especially if you act on those values constantly, as you know, I would expect someone who believes a value to do, you know, like if you're walking around with someone who just like litters everywhere and you don't like littering, then you're probably not going to be very happy about that, and that will affect your quality of life. And you know, people can also like litter on the road, and you're like, you know, it's people like that who like cause these problems. But does that mean that you should just get rid of them? Does that mean that you should flee to a country where they don't exist? Or should we instead try to help each other and move towards a global society? Break down the borders, get rid of these notions of nations, you know, and national identities. Yes, governments are important, but the fact that governments are independent is both necessary but also a restriction, because it means that we have these competing nations. I mean, we don't have much colonization going on right now. You know, like the world is quite. I mean, like there are wars going on. Like Israel wants to take, you know, parts of Palestine back. I guess. I mean, it's even back. Like, was it ever parts of Israel? I don't know the history to that extent. Russia wants to take Ukraine. America is doing sneaky things with like Greenland and was it Cuba, maybe, or like Colombia or something. Like, ultimately, countries will want to expand and take more resources, especially if they have an increasing population. So that they will just naturally need to make some kind of contact with other countries. I mean, like, they need to trade with other countries, have different resources, but like if those countries have vastly different values, then they're going to struggle to cooperate, and that's where conflict arises. So like it's an inevitability that we'll have to face these differences. So like deporting doesn't work. We need something that like literally some kind of system that gets us in agreement and functioning as a global society. So how that happen? There are many different ways, and you know, like I can say I don't know, but like there are genuine, like there are studies and research, and like people have thoughts about this, and like given suggestions. There are ways we can go forward, and I guess that's what I will probably focus a lot of my life on, hopefully. So anyway, the reason I made this video, this recording, was because I wanted to talk about it. I was thinking about making a blog post about it, but really I need to think about it more. Probably go and like add things to my Obsidian even, like my Zettelkasten, so I have like these atomic notes that I can build up to kind of reach an understanding, because like right now I have like these different ideas, but like with the issues you have, because again like nothing's black and white, with these different issues, it's like trying to like think that like around them and think like, okay, how can we tackle this, like have a system that truly works for everyone. So that will take some more structured thinking tools, which is my Zettelkasten will be useful for that. To do that, I will want to set up my Obsidian and NeoVim workflow. I do want to get that working, so I'll probably focus on that at some point soon. But yeah, anyway, just wanted to make a video where I kind of talk about that and get those like ideas flowing, and see if anyone wants to watch this video and gives their thoughts too. We'll see. But on a closing note, just to kind of clarify a few things, a few disclaimers for my own safety. I do not want to deport people. I think deportation is problematic because it means these people cannot get the support they need and the help they need. But I also realize that countries may not have the resources to focus on, you know, so many different people coming in at once. Because like maybe the UK just happens to have the perfect philosophy, you know, that like genuinely does satisfy the majority of people. But you know, we like our population is 69, so almost 70 million people, right? That is dwarfed by the 8.1 billion people. It's probably higher now. World population. So again, 70 million. We have 8.3 billion people in the world, right? That 0.3 is already 300 million, which is like 4 UKs. And then you have the 8 billion. Like, you can't have 5 billion people who agree with UK's values coming to the UK. It just can't happen unless the UK expands. So, we can't just accept anyone who comes at our doorstep unless we have better resources and also the capacity to grow. So honestly, probably one thing that would help, right, is rejoining the EU. That'd be really helpful. And then if we have disagreements with the EU on like different policies, then we should be able, like, the EU itself should also be open to to hearing out our issues, and then we can kind of fight for that. But like, ultimately, it is also the people. Like, the people will shape what the EU is like. Yes, you can have corruption and some forms of democratic dictatorship, but like, still, the people have power. It just depends on if the people can be aware enough of the corruption to fight against it and not vote for it, as Americans have done for some reason. It's quite baffling. And that comes from education. There's no coincidence that Trump's legislation focus on education, right? The education systems to change them and make them teach probably more like conservative things that will get them to vote for conservatives as well. Like, what Trump has done and his party is not just is not just taken the country and abused it to profit, whatever. Like, it's also setting up their positions so that they can stay in power, and that happens by manipulating the people. So the EU and the UK right now are in a fragile state where a lot of people are being manipulated. They are listening to people like Nigel Farage. In Germany, you have the AfD, right? The something for Deutschland, and we need to tackle these issues before it goes over and we end up having kind of a situation like Brexit, where surprisingly and regrettably, from most people you talk to on the streets, we make a decision like leaving the EU or voting for reform. Things that, quite frankly, aren't in our best interests. Like, whether or not you have these values of like, oh, immigrants should not be in our country and whatnot, like, the people who tell you those, who tell, well, maybe not you, but like, I say you as in like people, the people who tell you that those things do not have your best interest in mind anyway. And that is just a fact. So, like, regardless of what your values are, we can at least agree that corruption should not be in the government. So it's important to vote against that, and to have people use their voice while they can. So action needs to be taken. You cannot just be complacent. So that's my view in general. Just to say, I'm not a xenophobe or racist. I'm just someone who has a very weak national identity and who would rather tie their identity to things that they actually believe in, not just the countries they happen to live in. And I would like to see that change as well. I mean, I'd like to see the rest of the world change to reflect that. Yes, to impose my own values on the rest of the world. But because I see them as actually being a solution to a lot of the problems we face right now, rather than just doing it because I think this is right. Like, no, like, it's practical. Like, it is actually practical. So, there you go. Also, I haven't like really talked about Islamophobia. That's like a big part of the issue right now in the UK, and like a big thing that reform rides on. But I mean, like, it's, yeah. I mean, like, I've talked generally about conflicting cultures. There's a whole thing to be said about like religion in general and like religious values. Like, because they're traditional, they don't change over time, and that's an issue in of itself. It goes against like reason and logic and science. But that's a whole other kind of worms. But yeah, I mean, maybe that's a solution. Just have people actually follow science and believe in science. Because like science isn't like this government body. Like it's a way of carrying out research that humans have shown to be reliable, right? Like if I do X, Y happens, and it happens consistently under these variables. Therefore, I can probably, believe that, because like ultimately like everything is a belief. Like believe your eyes, believe your what you see and what you perceive. Maybe when we were in the Matrix, but like whatever the case, there are like facts that we can agree on from what we agree upon being facts about reality. So maybe that's probably the solution. And then people who, I don't know, reject science. I mean, like you could be skeptical of like scientific discoveries, and people who share it. But like generally speaking, if you can, like, you should not be skeptical of the scientific method. If you are, then that's probably the bigger issue in terms of values and why you might have conflicting cultures. I mean, even in Qatar, I went to an international school, but the country is obviously. I use obviously way too often. For those who don't know, Qatar is an Islamic state. And so you had, for example, in TOK for the IB, which is Theory of Knowledge, it's like very philosophical, or even like in biology class, you would have these conflicting values where like, let's say my biology teacher is Muslim and she's teaching like about evolution, from like a scientific, almost like a story kind of standpoint, while still believing, and even saying to the class like, well, but people don't necessarily believe in this, this is what science says, but the Islam will say, or Christianity will say, or Judaism will say that humans came from God, and it's like, well, that's not very good to be having in schools, because like that's not different perspectives, like that's just straight up conflicting like sources of information, and like we need to agree on sources, like sources of information, or else we can't like ever find a common ground. So that's probably the bigger issue, and that needs to be addressed. So maybe I can just write something about that as well. Although you have to be careful because these are obviously, and well, these are very sensitive topics as well. Like so far I've talked about national identity. Religious identity is a whole other thing that is probably an even bigger issue, but it also leaks into national identity, because typically, like religion is so central to a nation that it becomes part of that national identity. Like if I said I was Qatari, you'd assume I was Muslim. If I said I was Spanish, you'd probably assume I was a Catholic Christian. Or even in Ireland, like having Northern Ireland and Southern Ireland, you have the Catholics and the Protestants, and like that's been a huge point of conflict in the past, like civil wars and the Troubles and whatnot. So yeah. Anyway, there you go. Interesting stuff, and I'd like to elaborate more on it and think more on it, because very important issues that I want to see addressed and solved. Yeah. Subscribe to see more developments there, I guess.